You may think that an oyster or a clam shucking knife is the same, but guess what? They are pretty different. You cannot open a clamshell using an oyster knife and vice versa, as both require different opening techniques. Why? Though both clams and oysters are bivalves, which belong to the class Mollusca, order Bivalvia, the formation of body and shell are entirely different. And that is where the difference in opening techniques and the used shucking knives come from. Clam knives are designed for cutting through tough shellfish such as clams or mussels. They are also great for opening oysters. Oyster knives are usually smaller and thinner than clam knives. They are ideal for opening raw oysters. Both types of knives are very useful tools. If you're looking for a good quality knife, then you should consider buying both. The choice depends on your preference and budget. What is an oyster knife? An oyster knife is a small knife used for cutting open oysters. The blade is made from steel and has a rounded tip. It is usually used when opening oysters at restaurants. Despite the blade being shorter than a clam knife, it can still be used to force the shell open, especially when the right amount of force is applied. Like clam knives, oyster knives can come in various shapes and sizes. Although there are different knives for different species of oyster. For example, wide-handed oyster knives are the best for shucking beach oysters and are commonly used to tackle less fragile species. While smaller oyster knives are used for more intricate and delicate oysters, such as the Kumamotos. If you try to shuck one of these oysters with a large knife, the shell would break under the force. The blade. There are many different types of knives, depending on the kind of oysters and how the user shucked them. A wide and short blade is perfect for beach large oysters with a strong or hard shell and will not break easily when you apply force to open it. A short, narrow, and sharp blade is perfect for tricky, small, and precise oysters as Kumamotos. If you use different blade types with this kind of oyster, the shell could be easily broken when you use your force to open it and damage the tender meat inside. The blade of oyster shucking knife is not usually sharp, and it ends with a slightly sharp pointed tip. The handle. Oyster shucking handles are available in different shapes and sizes due to the knife's type, but a rounded or long pear-shaped handle will be perfect for this task. It would be best to have a lightweight, firm handle with a comfortable grip to make the shucking task more manageable, as the shucking process could take a long time due to the number of oysters you need to shuck. What is a clam knife? A clam knife is a tool used for cutting through clams. The blade is made from stainless steel and has a serrated edge. Clam knives are typically sold at hardware stores and come in a range of different sizes. While they are known as clam knives, the tool can also be used to open mussels and other shellfish. Because of this, they are sometimes used to open oysters. However, clam knives are unique in their design, as one side of the blade is blunt. This is because the clam itself can be removed using your fingers, as opposed to oysters, which need to be cut out. The blade. A thin or slim blade can quickly and easily go through a clamshell than a thick blade. A long and flat blade that ends with a rounded tip would be perfect for opening clams. The blade should generally be firm solid with a slightly sharp edge, to cut through the clam muscles. The handle. Always choose a handle with a stable, smooth, and comfortable grip so the shucking process will be easier on you. Knives with long or large handles are suitable for giant clams, while smaller ones with short handles are perfect for small clams. A large clam shucking knife is preferred if you don't know which size of clam you are going to shuck. In general, a lightweight and slim knife handle will be perfect for this task, as the shucking process could take a long time. Clam knife versus oyster knife, what's the difference? The clam knife has a long blade for cutting through thin shells, while the oyster knife has a short blade for cutting through thick shells. Of course, both knives also differ in their shape and size, with the clam knife boasting a more slender and elegant design when compared to the short and sturdy oyster knife. This difference in size reflects the uses of both knives, as the oyster knife is used to bore into the shell to pop it open. The science of opening a clam and an oyster is also different, which is why we use different knives to tackle the two shellfish. For example, you can open an oyster by inserting the blade between the two shells and using force to pry it apart. However, for clams, this process is a little different. Unlike oyster knives, clam knives boast a blunt edge, which can be used to open the back of the shell and cut out the meat inside. Which one should you own? In most cases, it is recommended that you own both knives if you enjoy shucking your own shellfish. This is because both knives have their individual uses and should only be used when tackling their respective species. If you attempt to open a clam with an oyster knife, or vice versa, you could risk damaging the shell and compromising the meat inside. This can also lead to severe injuries, as the wrong blade could slice through the shell and cut your fingers or hand. That is why we recommend purchasing both knives for their respective uses, as you should only use an oyster knife for oysters and a clam knife for clams. However, it is also possible to use a clam knife to open oysters and other shellfish, even though it is not recommended by professional chefs and fishmongers. Are there other alternatives? While it is possible to open a clam or an oyster with a sharp kitchen knife, it is not recommended and is considered a dangerous substitute for a proper shucking tool. These days, some shuckers will use a type of can opener to pop the shells open, as the sharp tip allows them to apply the correct amount of force. However, this tool can also cause serious injuries if used incorrectly, which is why it is still advisable to use a clam or oyster knife when opening their respective shellfish. How to use a clam knife? To use a clam knife, all you have to do is hold the clam firmly in the palm of your hand. For the best results, we recommend covering your hand with a towel or cloth, as this will reduce the chances of injury and allow a better grip. When examining the clam, you will notice that one side of the shell flares out. Insert the clam knife into that point and force the blade between the shells before prying it open. Once the clam has been accessed, cut through the muscles that hold the meat in place and remove it from the shell. Make sure not to damage the clam during this process. How to use an oyster knife. It is easier to open shellfish when they are cold, which is why you should always keep clams and oysters refrigerated until you're ready to shuck the meat. Unfortunately, shucking clams is a lot easier than shucking oysters, as their shells allow easy access to the delicacy inside. Oysters, on the other hand, can be quite complicated. The best way to open an oyster is by boring the tip of the blade between the two shells, with the best point of access being the hinge at the pointed end. Once the knife has been inserted, push the blade with enough force until the shell pops open. To make the oyster easier to eat, run the knife along the inside of the shell and loosen any meat still clinging to the exterior. Final thoughts. Clam knives and oyster knives differ not only in their uses, but also in their shape and size. While clam knives boast a long and slender blade, which can be used to pry the shell open, oyster knives feature a short and sturdy point, which allows the shucker to pop the shell open and cut out the meat inside. While it is possible to open clams and oysters with other utensils, this can damage both the shell and your hands, which is why you should always use the correct tools for the job. Shucking shellfish can take some practice, but it is a skill that every chef and seafood lover should have in their arsenal.